Hey folks, thanks for tuning in. I hope all is well. This is some new material on the Wattles. Under my business banner, I have been delivering eucalyptus workshops, and so I've put together a whole heap of eucalyptus material, and I'm still working on that and still continue to do that. But I've just started delivering wattle or acacia species workshops as well. And so I'm putting together some material for that and making it available on my channel. If you want to get more familiar with the wattles or just learn a bit more about them, some things you might not understand about them, that's what this material's for. This is the introductory lecture, just like I gave an introduction on the eucalypt genera. This is just on the wattles, straightforward, one genus, Acacia. So it's the introductory one, and then I'll try and put up some videos and lectures about individual species that we come across and make some videos in the field as well. So I just put this one together recently. We'll try and whack through it. The wattles, yeah, they are one of Australia's most prominent genera, and they sort of outdo the eucalypts. They get up to 1,000 species, or maybe around 960. They tell us that 99% of those are endemic. So, you know, just a massive amount of endemism. Just skipping down to here, like eucalyptus, they're not an endemic genus to Australia. They have a real prominence in Africa, the Middle East, South America, and into Southeast Asia. And I've also read today there's some that's native to America as well, or North America. So they're a very prominent worldwide genus. They're very historic. They've got a lot of use dating back, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of years. So 1,500 species are worldwide. And when you get up to about the ballpark's about the 1,300 species mark, you get put in the top 10 most diverse plant genera in the world. So I think Acacia is about number 8 in terms of diversity. You've got some other genera there like Carex and Solanum, but you're in the top 10 once you go over about 1,300 species. So we've got them all across the country, all states and territories, no problem at all. You can think about how the groups of species have been separated for a long time. So Australia now has its own, and Africa and the Middle East would have theirs, and South America probably has a high amount of endemism as well. So all these groups have been separated for a long period of time. We're New South Wales based, so we just have a bit of a primary focus there. We've got about 235 species, and some of them are introduced. So we'll get into this, but just the way wattles do business, they easily get around and move their seed around. We've got cases here where some Western Australian species have become weeds in New South Wales and vice versa. We've got plenty of wattles, Australian wattles, I would think, that have gone weedy overseas as well. So they are a bit of a weedy genus. They move out of their natural ranges very easily. They do that through horticulture and just through land management practices as well. And they move around quite readily. So we do have some introduced, but yeah, a lot of diversity in New South Wales with 235. Obviously, we're in the flowering trees and shrubs. We're in the dicots, just like the eucalypts, just dealing with that group. And some of them are prickly. I'm just throwing that in. I think in Africa, that's a real prominent thing. A lot of the wattles there, or the acacia there, are really prickly. We've got some prickly ones even in New South Wales. Now, we'll get into the technicalities of the foliage, but just note, sometimes it's the foliage that's prickly, and sometimes you've got little stipules on the stems, and sometimes they sort of modify to thorns. So you've got these modified stipules. So the stipules can make the plant prickly, or it can be the foliage itself. So you can get those 2 cases, but we don't have too many prickly ones, but there's certainly enough out there. Sometimes the foliage or the phyllodes here, they've got a really sharp, prominent mucro or point on the end, and that'll certainly make them prickly. The genus Acacia, it's reportedly from an ancient Greek word, Acacia. There's no C's in the Greek alphabet or the Greek language. It refers to an ancient Greek preparation, a medicinal preparation made from one of the many species. And that name derives from an old word called archis, which means a thorn, apparently. And it's referring to the thorny species in Africa and the Middle East and possibly in the Mediterranean as well. Wattle is an old word reported to refer to a pliant woody branch. So a lot of these sort of skinny wattle shrubs, you can easily bend them over and they've got a lot of flexibility. And they were used to build huts and things like that. So that's what the word wattle refers to, just that flexible woody branch there. You can see reference to mimosa bushes or mimosas. This is even a biblical term. It's sort of scattered through the Bible, people say. And even the name Moses, it sort of links to this sort of word mimosa. It's a genus in the, sort of related to wattles. But they do, and they sort of look like wattles too, mimosas. But they do get called mimosa bushes or mimosas. And in Australia, you'd almost say they're present in all vegetation types. Look, you might have some exceptions like extensive grasslands or, alpine herb fields or something like that. But you don't have to go far to find a wattle. That's the main sort of point. They can be big trees in rainforest. They get into the desert vegetation that sweeps across the country. In the middle of Australia, you can have mulga shrublands, which is dominated by a wattle. You know, there's not too many vegetation types where you won't find wattle hanging around, so it's pretty ubiquitous out there. Pretty common. It's in the family Fabaceae, so that's what we're dealing with in this particular group. And it's in when we deal with a Fabaceae family, we tend to recognise these subfamilies and we tend to state these subfamilies. So any sort of species lists where you might have recorded some plants in an ecological report or something like that, or in a book, if you're profiling these, you'll state this full sort of subfamily name. Because the Fabaceae is sort of divided up into these sort of really different and recognisable subfamilies. So it's a subfamily Mimosoideae. It used to be its own family, the Mimosaceae. And if you look at some old plant books, even plant books based in the Sydney area, you will see that old family name, Mimosaceae. But as long as I've been studying botany and work in it, the last 15, 20 years, I've always been familiar with this Mimosoideae name. It's a massive family, the Fabaceae. It's absolutely huge. It's the 5th largest in the world in terms of species diversity. I think we're talking something like 20 to 30,000 species. It's worldwide. It's a very successful family, mainly just in the way it chooses to do business and the range of plants you can get. Everything from little ground-hugging herbs to large trees to sort of soft shrubs. They've got the whole range of habits in there. The subfamily Faboideae is the peas, anything that produces what we call a pea flower. And subfamily C is our Pinoideae. That is the Acacias and the Sennas. And there's 4 other subfamilies as well, and I'm not even familiar strongly with the other 4 subfamilies. But Mimosoideae is the wattles. That's sort of what we've always been taught. Mimosoideae is the wattles, Faboideae is the peas, and this one, the Caesar Pinoideae, is the Acacias and the Sennas. Now, I've just seen a recent classification online, or reclassification, that the Mimosoideae has now gone into the Caesar Pinoideae. Now, I haven't seen that taken up yet by New South Wales Flora online, but it is there on some online resources. So we might see the sort of loss of this name here, and the wattles might go into this group. So obviously they're considered as being closely related to the Acacias or the Sennas. The whole family gets referred to as the legumes. Sometimes the peas or the legumes. They're not all peas, so the legumes are a much more common thing. That links to the common fruit that is produced by every single species in the Fabaceae, and that's a pea pod. They produce a pod, or a bean pod, you might like to call it. And sometimes that gets referred to as a legume as well. If you're eating legumes, you're eating beans or peas. And the other thing these guys have, and it's not unique to them, but they have these nitrogen-fixing nodules in their roots. So in a really cool, awesome bit of sort of biological work, if you pull up their roots, you can see these little sort of lumps along the roots. Sort of probably more obvious in some species than others, but you get these bumps along the roots, and the way it was explained to me at uni is they're simply little houses that bacteria move into, little cells which bacteria move into, and those bacteria are nitrogen fixing. And what they help the plant to do is sort of fast track their nitrogen fixation into available nitrates, which plants always use to grow. So there's a nitrogen cycle, and the atmospheric nitrogen will go through a cycle to be converted into nitrates. But these bacteria, they help the plant skip a step, and they'll just take the atmospheric nitrogen and convert it into nitrates, probably in exchange for sugars or something like that. So I guess I assume those bacteria are possibly always hanging out in the soil and just looking to migrate and move into these houses. As far as I know, I might have to do a bit more to develop my understanding of that, but they move in when those nodules are available. I guess they breed and propagate inside those nodules. And that's what they do. So what it means for the Fabaceae generally is they do business really quickly. They grow really fast. A lot of them die young. They don't live very long. They put out a lot of seed. They flower quickly, and they produce fruit quickly, and they seed quickly. The eucalypts do business much more slowly, and all those long-lived trees do business a lot more slowly. But these guys are in a hurry. They're a lot of the time, the peas and the wattles and the sennas, they're in a hurry. They want to get things done. So live fast, die young is a little bit of a trait, or I'd say a sort of general trait almost for the Fabaceae. A lot of seed production. And they've got species all around the world, and we've got a whole heap of Fabaceae natives and weeds here as well, which we're not going to lose anytime soon. So it's just one feature about them which we sort of always consider when dealing with legumes. We've got 5 morus flowers. We've got flowers with 5 parts. They'll generally have a 5, a calyx or 5 sepals at the base of the flower. They'll have 5 petals. Now, in a pea flower, that can be a bit hard to discern, but in a pea flower, you've got the 5 petals have been modified sort of all unevenly and to sort of different degrees to create that pea flower shape. In the wattles, you've got staminate flowers. You've got flowers with a 5-lobed calyx or a 5-lobed corolla, and then you've got a whole heap of stamens. And then the Acacias and the Sennas, you've sort of got a rotate flower. You've got these rotate 5 morus flowers, and we've got those other subfamilies as well. But these are some of the types that we get. And they're bisexual in most cases. So the Fabaceae are known for having bisexual flowers. It's not in all cases, but it's in most. In the Mimosoideae, like I said, flowers with a regular 5 morus calyx and corolla, sepals and petals, and many stamens. So we call that a staminate flower. Again, like the eucalypts, it's the stamens that are sort of putting on the show. They're the ones that are sort of making the flowers really stand out. And we've got one carpel sitting in the middle, so it makes it a bisexual flower. The fruit is a pod. That is the huge thing about the family Fabaceae. You've got a pod, and it's hard to find many other plant families producing true pods. Some plants look like they're producing pods, but they're actually capsules, even though you'll always hear a lot of people talking about seed pods generally. But a pod is an actual botanical, specific fruit that sort of splits down both sides and opens to release a seed. And it's mainly the Fabaceae that are known for having pods, even though other plant families, they do have fruits which look like pods. But when you look into them, they might be described as a capsule or a follicle. They're highly variable, a lot of shapes and sizes. They're not all sort of bean pods. Some of them are small triangular things. Some of them are really tiny. They don't take a pod shape. They might take more of a triangle shape or something like that. But by and large, they've pretty much got something that resembles a bean pod, just a high diversity of shapes and sizes. Now, in the Acacia genus, we just move into the actual genus now within the Mimosoideae. It's not the only genus in the Mimosoideae, but normally these features stack up for the Mimosoideae subfamily. It definitely stacks up from Acacia. The leaves are always alternate, always. I keep saying if you meet a wattle with opposite leaves, make sure you get in contact with me because I'd like to meet it. They're alternate. But the thing is, they come in two types. So we've got a genus here that can throw two very different types of leaves, and we just got to go through what's happening here. They can throw phyllodes which appear to be simple. They sort of look like a simple leaf, but they're not a true leaf. They're actually a modified leaf, which arises from the flattening out of the leaf petiole, or what we might call the leaf stem, or the leaf rachis. And what we've got to get our heads around is, to firstly cover that the second type of leaf that is produced, and it's produced first, is a compound bipinnate leaf. So a compound leaf as opposed to a simple leaf, and it's got the compound leaf type of being bipinnate. And we'll go through what it means to be a sort of bipinnate leaf. Now, if you know a jacaranda tree, I don't mind saying this compound bipinnate, you can call it jacaranda foliage or jacaranda type foliage. If you look at a jacaranda tree, it's got the best example of what it means to have bipinnate compound foliage or compound bipinnate foliage. So I just call it jacaranda-like. Some people might disagree with that, but that's my term. The compound bipinnate leaves are the juvenile foliage. They're the juvenile foliage that is produced here first when the seedling emerges. And then what we get is a whole heap of species, not all, as we'll see, but some, losing that bipinnate foliage and putting on these phyllodes afterwards. So that's what we're getting happening in these wattles. Now, the compound bipinnate leaves are the juvenile foliage, and in some species it's retained, and we get what we call this group of wattles called the bipinnates, the bipinnate wattles. The remaining species produce the juvenile bipinnate leaves, and then they undergo a transition where the central rachis of those bipinnate leaves flattens out and it produces a phyllodes. And you can actually see this happening in the field on some plants. I think this is Acacia suaveolens. This is a good one to look at, where you can actually see some bipinnate foliage up here, and then the top of it is starting to flatten out into this phyllodes-like organism. It's really cool when you see it, and you can easily get a photograph of it. So just a close-up here. Again, we've got a seedling. The seedling has produced you know, they're really sort of reduced bipinnate leaves, but they are there. They've only got sort of two, what we'll learn as two pinna attached. But then as soon, you know, probably after a couple of weeks even, after it's germinated and it's done this, it's going to stop doing that now, and it's going to put on these phyllodes. And what you can get is you can get one of these bipinnate leaves, you can get this bit starts to flatten out, and the phyllodes starts to sort of push itself through here, and these bits more or less drop off. That's what happens. So that's the transition from the bipinnate to the phyllodes leaves. Just look out for that. This is in bushlands after a bushfire. You can readily see this happening. Now, it is thought, I've read this online really recently, and I should have put a reference in. It was from Macquarie University in New South Wales. But what we've been told historically is the species that retain their bipinnate foliage, they're sort of the ancestral group. And the ones that have evolved to produce the phyllodes, well, they have decided to do business in a more efficient and sort of hardcore way, and they've sort of evolved from the bipinnate species. So these guys are a little bit more advanced. But what they're showing now through cladistics and I guess phylogenetics is there's probably been several evolutionary events where clades of wattle species have retained the juvenile foliage and become bipinnate, with other clades evolving to produce phyllodes. So it hasn't been just a one-off thing where the bipinnates are the ancestral species. We've had sort of multiple evolutionary events, with some general conclusions being that the phyllodes or the phyllodeal species will evolve in periods where the world is hotter and drier, and the bipinnate ones will evolve in over, you know, we're talking long periods of time, over thousands and say a couple of million-year periods where the conditions are wetter and cooler. So they say that the bipinnate species, they've got more photosynthetic capability than the phyllodeal ones. They can sort of grow and photosynthesize a bit quicker. These guys are sort of a little bit slower, but they're definitely better at retaining water and not losing as much water in the harsh Australian landscape. And they're a bit tougher and a bit sort of harsher, but maybe they do business a little bit more slowly. So that's the recent thinking, and I guess that's on some DNA and some sort of phylogenetic analysis that different periods of sort of climate will generate different evolutionary periods in phyllodeal versus bipinnate. Stipules, I talked about the stipules a bit earlier, which can be modified to produce thorns. Modified to thorns on the stems. They can be produced, but often they fall early, and that's a feature called cauticus, where just the stipules fall off early. You can have cauticus flower petals, you can have cauticus fruit, you know, they just don't hang around for long, but sometimes they're modified into thorns. Stipules are a really prominent part of the Fabaceae family. They're a part of some other families as well. Usually they're absent in a lot of families, but if you get a plant, a plant you're trying to identify and it's got stipules on it, well, the Fabaceae family is one you're going to have to consider because the stipules are normally pretty prominent. The Rosaceae, that's another family which has really prominent stipules. So these bipinnate wattles, the compound bipinnates, this is what they can do. This is what they do. These are their adult leaves. So this whole structure is a leaf, and you can see here they can look very different. You can have more gaps between what we call the leaflets here. They can be a bit more compact. This one's sort of larger and green. This one's sort of smaller and a bit bluey, and that's what their overall foliage looks like there. When you have a whole branch of a bipinnate species. So that's what we mean by the bipinnates. and we're going to have a good look at those. And then we have our phylloidal ones. I've seen that term online. Hopefully it's a proper term. So phylloidal species or phylloid-bearing species, and they just come in a wider range of shapes and sizes. They can look like this and look like this. These ones are pretty similar, but it just shows you the variation, you know, short, fat, prominent venation, different venation here, larger shrubs, smaller shrubs, etc. And they can even be really reduced to these really rigid, prickly little friends here, and a real prickly one over here, because the phylloid here is modified to a really tough, the phylloid has a really tough mucro on the end, which will make this one really prickly. Here the phylloids really hug the stem and are completely fused to the stem. In this guy, they're highly reduced, you know, maybe about 1 centimetre long, really pungent, really prickly with a strong mucro on them. That's just a variety we can get. But what I try and emphasise is it's all variations on the one theme. You know, no wattle is doing anything crazily different to any other wattle. They're either producing bipinnate leaves of different colours, shapes and sizes, or they're producing phyllodes of different shapes and sizes. The flower structure is always the same. They can arrange them differently, and just with 1,000 species we get a wide variety of variation, but they're just all putting variations on the one theme. That's a thing to sort of note. They might make their phyllodes look really tricky and sort of modified, but they're just all doing business in the same way. Just a lot of variation there, which is really beautiful to see. So remember, the leaves are alternate. They come in 2 types. These are the compound leaf wattles, the ones that retain their compound foliage. Now, in that particular case, this whole structure is a leaf. So when you've got a bipinnate leaf, when you've got a compound leaf, this whole structure is a leaf. Now, that term bipinnate, it just refers to 2 levels of division. So the leaf has been divided sort of twice, and the leaflets are sort of sitting here on these individual structures on the main leaf segment. Now, if I had a compound leaf which was pinnate, it would look like this. This is what we call if you have a leaf that looks like this arrangement here, that's what you call a pinnate leaf. You can look at a plant like claret ash, the fraxinus, to see what's meant by a pinnate leaf, or something like a roost tree, which you don't want to get too close to, or a Chinese pistachia, something like that. That's just a couple of examples where we have a pinnate leaf, or one of the Fabaceae family like Robinia, that'll have a pinnate leaf as well. But when you get sort of, 2 levels of division, that's what we mean by bipinnate. Excuse me, and you can see that there in this leaf here. And just with the wattles, some individual new terms come in. So on any sort of compound leaf plant, we would call these leaflets. These would get called leaflets, and this whole thing is called a leaf. And but in the wattles, because they can be really small and they've just come up with some different terminology, these are called pinnules. So they're called pinnules, or you can call them leaflets. Either one is acceptable. Where you have a group of pinnules, and that might be like a, what we would call a little sort of pinnate leaf there, if that was on any other plant, they call that a pinna. So just a group there, just one discrete unit of leaflets is called a pinna, and the plural for that is pinnae with an E on it. So you might say the pinnae are hairy, the pinnae are dark green, the pinnae are 5 centimetres long. You might say something like that. But an individual is a pinna, and altogether they're called pinnae. You do have a petiole. You've got a leaf petiole here, but what wattles have is a sort of swollen, wrinkled base, which the wattle experts think is sort of noticeable and conspicuous, and that gets called the pulvinus. It's just a segment of swollen, wrinkly tissue at the base of the leaf. So that'll get called the pulvinus, and that might be, I don't know, 5 mil long or a centimetre long, or it might be like a millimetre long. Sometimes they say it's not very noticeable. Excuse me. So you might have that there. And then this central part of the leaf here, up to the first pair of pinnae, that'll be classed as the petiole. So the pulvinus and that bit there makes up the petiole, and then this bit after the first pair of pinnae, that will be called the rachis, the leaf rachis. And in those phyllodeal species, it is this bit that sort of flattens out and becomes the phylode, with all these sort of bits getting pushed off. So that'll flatten out into the phylode. It'll be generated from one of those bipinnate leaves. It's pretty funky, but that's what happens. At least in the early stages, whether all leaves, all leaves that are produced start off with little bits of bipinnate foliage. As far as I know, they do, and then they're flattened out into a phylode as they go along. What you've got on these bipinnate wattles is what's really distinctive are these glands. These glands along the rachis, and these become very important for identification. And we'll get into those as we go through. But just remember those glands there. If you've got a gland between a pair of pinnae, or two pinna, if you've got a gland there between two pinnae, that's called a jugary gland. It's sort of joining the two sort of segments there. If you've got a gland between, the language here gets complicated because I'm saying between pinnae, but that's between sort of pinnae as well. If you've got a gland on the sort of inter part between a pair of pinnae there and a pair of pinnae there, if you've got a gland in between on the rachis, that's called an interjugary gland. And what we see in bipinnate wattles is that the position and number of these glands, whether they be jugary or interjugary, varies enormously, and it's crucial for species identification. They vary enormously. It's really interesting how they do. Now, these glands, they are known for releasing sugary material, polysaccharides. They release them from nectaries within the glands, and you have this sugary substance being released, and that sugary substance does a very good job of attracting ants. It attracts ants up on the foliage and up into the trees, and the ants will generally protect the plants from insect attack or herbivory or any other sort of attack that the plant might get. They might not be able to protect it from disease, but any other pest attack, the ants will do a very good job at fending anything off. So a lot of the time when you get up into this wattle foliage and have a good look at it, you'll see ants running up and down the leaves, and they're harvesting or eating this sugary substance. So they've got a really close affinity with ants, some of these wattles. Just remember, again, that whole thing is a leaf, and the leaves are alternate. So all I'm saying there is, as you come up the stem, you'll have another leaf, compound leaf there. And as you come up the stem, you'll have another one there. And as you come up the stem, you'll have another one there. Each bipinnate compound leaf will be alternately arranged to the next one. They won't be opposite. If they were opposite, you'd have another leaf coming out here, sort of there. You'd have this thing mirrored on this side. Now, not to confuse you, but if you look at a jacaranda tree, that's what you'll see. Look at a jacaranda tree and you'll see they've got opposite leaves. They've got the compound bipinnate leaf, but they're arranged opposite. They're not in this family, the jacarandas, but like I said, it's a good example of what it means to have compound bipinnate foliage, but you'll see another compound leaf coming out there. But it's not the case with wattles. So what I did say at the workshop was, even though you might have leaflets which are arranged oppositely, and you might have pinnae which are arranged oppositely. In this case, you've got one there and one there, and one there and one there, and the leaflets are opposite. Just because you have that, remember the whole leaf arrangement is alternate, because you're looking at this whole structure. Now, in all species, you might not have the pinnae arranged oppositely. They might be sort of sub-opposite, or they might be alternate. Just in this particular example, this drawing, it looks like they're opposite. So one pinna there and one pinna there, they're opposite, and the leaflets are opposite. But it doesn't always have to be that way. The leaflets might be alternate and the pinna might be alternate. You might have a pinna there and one there maybe. This one just might come down a bit to be there, sort of thing. And that might get described in the species, profiles and descriptions. So when you look at rainforest plants, and I said this, when you look at rainforest plants, you get a lot of trees that have compound leaves. And what the species description might say is leaves alternate, leaflets opposite. And you got to think, all right, hang on, the leaves are alternate, but the leaflets are opposite. Okay, you might have the other way around, leaves opposite, leaflets on the leaf alternate. And you got to get your head around, got to make sure you're picking that up. Otherwise, you might go well and truly down the wrong path in your species identification. Just looking at some features, that's a bipinnate wattle. That's Acacia terminalis. We've got a pair of pinnae here, which are oppositely arranged. There's the gland. There's a big sort of, big bugger off gland there. They're really noticeable in this species. This would be a petiolar gland. It's not up as a jugary or an interjugary gland yet. That's sort of might be sort of an interjugary or petiolar gland there. But that's releasing the sugar. And on this plant, I tried to get some good photos of them. I didn't quite do it justice, but this one's got a lot of interjugary glands. It's got sort of about 5. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and again 1, 2, 3. There might be a jugary gland there, but this species, which is Acacia falcifolia, is known for having a lot of interjugary glands. So you can see those, and do look for ants running up and down them. Very important for identification. Just talking about the interjugary and the jugary glands there. So just make sure you refer to that diagram, because when I profile the bipinnate species, it's going to become really important. Phyllodes. Then we move to the phyllodeal ones. So this is the second leaf condition we can get. Now, what happens is you just have a phyllodes which appears simple. It's got a margin. It's got a lamina. It might have a mucro on the tip. It's got a pulvinus. It's still got a pulvinus there. Looks like it takes up the whole petiole most of the time. Maybe it does. But the real funky thing, and it's a thing I sort of blow out about and other people have mentioned to me, and I'm now really starting to think about it, the gland gets pushed to, or glands get pushed to the edge. They get pushed to the edge of the leaf. And if this is the plant growing up and the ground's going down, the gland will be at the top of the leaf, or what we call the top edge. So if you look along the leaf, the top of the leaf, if we can discern a top and a bottom side, the gland will sort of be on the left. Now, I know this will depend which way you're looking at the plant, but it's always on what they call the top side or the left side. If there's an upper sky part to the leaf and a lower ground part to the leaf, it'll be on the top side. Now, what someone said to me they're sort of spinning out about is when the bipinnate leaf transitions to a phyllodes, why does the gland get pushed to the edge? Why doesn't it, say, sit in the middle or sit maybe, yeah, in the middle or somewhere in the middle of the lamina. It gets pushed to the edge and sits there on the edge of the leaf. That might have a really obvious answer. If you know what that is, yeah, feel free to enlighten me. But it's just interesting how the transition of that leaf to the phyllodes, it gets pushed to the edge. Now, some phyllodeal species will have one gland. They normally do. Sometimes they're described as either one gland or the gland is absent. Sometimes they have more than one gland. They might have one there, and they might have one right up here. So there's a lot of variation in the phyllodes glands. Sometimes you'll have a species where it says one gland, 5 to 30 mil above the pulvinus. So the gland might be there, or it might be, say, up there. And you've got to look for it. If you have a shrub that you can't identify and it's just got leaves, maybe obviously there's no flowers, no fruits, you go and you think it might be a wattle. You go, well, I reckon this is a wattle. You go looking along the leaves for these. This is what you have to do. You got to get a hand lens, go along the leaves and try and find some glands. Don't just check one leaf, check about 5 or 10 and see if you can pick up these phyllodes along the leaf edge. As soon as you pick them up looking like that, you're not going to go too far wrong. No other group in the Fabaceae has these glands, or these really wattle-looking glands. They're a real feature of the Mimosoideae, the wattles. So you just look at the leaf edge, try and find the top part of the leaf, and look for these glands along there. If you find them, you're pretty well assured that you've got a wattle. So they can be absent, and they're always important for identification. You've always got to count, look, see where they are in order to sort of nail down your species. One other feature is the leaf venation. Just whatever the veins are doing in the leaf, that's normally a very important part too of these phyllodeal species. So here we've got some longitudinal veins running along, and there might be 3 or 5, and that might be important. And then we have this thing called anastomosing, and this gets referenced to a lot. It's just a condition where the main veins are connected with smaller veins to form a network. So you have these lateral veins connecting the main veins. And it comes from an old Greek word called anastomosing. It's a word which sort of means to connect things together, and it's used in medicine a fair bit. Veins are running between these main veins, and I've just got an example here of what that looks like. This is from New South Wales Flora. Here you've got longitudinal veins, and the minor ones are not joined, so you'd say that's not anastomosing. Here we've got some anastomosing going on. We've sort of got the longitudinal minor veins being joined by these side veins. And here we've got really heavy anastomosing, or, forming a fine reticulum, a fine net-like venation. Really beautiful pattern, sort of reminds you of a stained glass window, but we've got a lot of really tertiary, you'd probably call them tertiary veins, joining the secondary and all the minor longitudinal veins. So it is a term that gets referred to regularly in wattles, whether they're anastomosing. I think in the New South Wales Flora key, it comes up about 14 times or 15 times in the couplets. So you've got to look for that as well. Then we get to the flowers. And just might show here what some people don't quite understand about wattle flowers. There's a lot of people who will say that wattles have these beautiful globular shaped flowers. And it's not really possible to have a globular shaped flower because you can only have all the parts sort of coming out across a 180 degree axis rather than a 360 degree axis. What we've got here is an inflorescence. We've got a globe or a globular head of many flowers. And you can actually pull the individual flowers out of this thing here. In this particular wattle, and we get groups that do this, it's just putting up a single globular head in the leaf axil. So it's just a globular head on its own with, tens of flowers making up the head. You can get pairs, you can get two heads coming out in some of these wattles out of a leaf axil. But what we'll see is you can get secondary and grandiose secondary arrangements of flowers in these sort of raceme or panicle-like groups or racemose type groups. So this is just what we're looking at now. Each individual flower, like we know, is fivemerous. We're going to see this. 5 sepals or calyx lobes. If the sepals are joined together, say down the bottom, we'll start to call them calyx lobes. Remember, the sepals make up the calyx. 5 petals. If they're free, if they're fused at the bottom, and they've got a degree of fusion in there, we'll call them corolla lobes. The petals make up the corolla. Numerous stamens, and they're surrounding one carpel. And what we've got to realise is they're arranged in either globular heads or spikes. That's how the wattle flowers are arranged. At least to start with, they're in globular heads or they're in spikes. And we'll look at some examples. So what I did only last week, I pulled the globular head off and I tried to pull out individual flowers, and I've got these under a microscope and I'm trying to take some really bodgy macro photos with my phone. That's an individual wattle flower. Now I'll try and give you some better idea of this, but that's the calyx down the bottom. You've then got a corolla of petals, 5 petals there, and they are partly fused into sort of corolla lobes. Then we've got all these beautiful stamens. The stamen consists of a filament, the stalk, and the head, which is an anther. And then you've got the carpel. The carpel is sticking out there, just one, and it's longer than the stamens. It shoots out there further. This one's exactly the same. You can see the carpel there and the whorl of stamens, the corolla and the calyx. So that's 4 flowers pulled out of this one wattle head from a particular species. That's a setup. That's just what they do. Here's an individual flower. This is from New South Wales Flora Online. I thought it helped to put this in because I think these ones were a little bit dry and wilted, but still you can see what's going on there. The calyx, the corolla, the stamens, and the one carpel coming out there. Just putting those terms up there. It's a much better diagram here. But you can see there the individual flower parts. And this is tiny. I should have a scale bar here, but this thing is absolutely tiny. This whole structure is about 3 millimeters long. It's probably about 1 millimeter wide. It's absolutely tiny. It was painstaking to try and separate them out. They seem to have a lot of static electricity, a lot of stickiness, a lot of charge. They were sticking together. But you can separate them out with a bit of time and care. So here we've got a globular head made up of individual flowers. There can be up to 80 flowers in these heads. And this is just an example of, you've just got one head coming out of a leaf axil. But in these bipinnate wattles and a lot of other phyllodeal wattles as well, they put the globular heads on these extended arrangements. And we might just call these a racemose or a panicle-like cluster. You've got a single unit here coming out, probably from the leaf axil, and you can see another branch there, and then it's going to put these globular heads on the sides coming out. And there might be, 10 or 15 or 20 globular heads on these raceme-like groups. They might be up to 10 centimetres long or 15 centimetres long, the whole structure. And the heads might be, 1 centimetre across or something like that. You can see it really clearly there. So here we've got a whole cluster of heads being arranged together. And that's what a lot of wattles will do as well. So solitary globular heads or paired globular heads, as we saw in that prickly beastie a bit earlier. but then we'll get a whole lot that put on these nice racemose sprays. And that's what you've got to look out for with some species. Very beautiful. You just think how many thousands of flowers are being produced in these like arrangements. Globular heads and then sprays of globular heads. Pretty cool. This is what we mean by spikes. They don't put them in globular heads, they put them in these spikes. And normally when they put them in spikes, you'll just get 1 or 2 or 3 spikes coming out of a leaf axil. You might have another one there and maybe another one there coming out of the same point of origin. The spikes aren't joined together like the globular heads are in those racemose or panicle-like groups or clusters. You're just getting another spike there and another spike there. They'll all originate from the same leaf axil. Now, I don't mind saying this because I really do think it's true. This isn't overly different from a bottle brush, a callistemon. It's in a different family. It's not related, and I don't want to confuse you, and this is a lot smaller, but it's basically what a callistemon does with a bottle brush. They've got staminate flowers in that Myrtaceae group. They're bisexual. The stamens are making up most of the flower. They've got petals and sepals at the bottom, and they've got one female part, one carpel coming out. And the bottle brush will put all its flowers together in a spike. In that case, you know, they can be 10 centimetres long and 4 centimetres wide. These guys are a lot smaller. This guy here, this spike would be about, I don't know, 4 centimetres long and about 1 centimetre across, with each wattle flower being very small. But it's doing exactly what a bottle brush does. And the flower structure is even pretty much the same. So it's a bit of parallel evolution here, or even convergent evolution. It's just putting its flowers in a bottle brush spike. And it does a very good job of it and makes them really showy on this. This is Acacia oxycedrus here. So that's the 2 different conditions we tend to get. That's another example. This is a wattle from Western Australia, Acacia denticulosa. It's a sandpaper wattle. Again, it puts these flowers in these really showy spikes, with each flower being absolutely tiny. And here you might be getting an example of more than one coming out of a leaf axil. Quite distinctive. I just throw this in, and I've borrowed this image from this website. You know, we want our concrete boxes, we want our globular heads versus our spikes. Just note that a couple of species can do an intermediate thing. Of course they can. You know, they got to rock the boat, just stretch those concrete boxes. But this is sort of putting on an intermediate sort of spike between a globular head and a spike. It's sort of an ovoid globular head, or it might be a short ovoid spike. And if you look at there, sort of looks like it's doing a globular head. But here it's doing sort of an ovoid spike. It's sort of an intermediate condition between a spike and a globular head. But you're not going to find too many of those. But just note, this guy has sort of chosen to, you know, do things in the middle. It's not quite a globular head and it's not quite one of those linear spikes, but it's in the middle. Just note that. We'd call that an ovoid sort of globular head or an ovoid spike. If you get them in bud, any sort of flowering wattle with the globular heads, you can count the flowers. Look how you can count the flowers. And you can easily see in these heads, you're getting up to 10, 20, 30 flowers in each head. It's quite beautiful to sort of watch the development of. Getting 30 flowers in a globular wattle head, that's no problem at all. Just remember, each flower, it's probably about 5 mil long, about 1 to 2 mils wide, and then this whole head might be 1 centimetre wide sort of thing. And this whole structure might be 20 or 30 centimetres wide, that sort of thing. The wattle flowers, they don't really have pedicels, but they'll have a peduncle, that's a shared stalk. They'll have that at the base, holding the whole structure. And it seems to me the wattle flowers, they don't have a noticeable, discernible pedicel. They've just got a sessile flower sitting there with every other flower in the head. The number of flowers in the globe or in the globular head can be used to determine identification. It's not totally easy because there's a lot of overlap, but some species, they'll say 5 to 15, 10 to 20, 10 to 25. And if you've got one that's got 50, well, it's probably going to be a different species. So just watch out for that. You can count them. And then I say, can we make a bit more sense of them? You know, we sort of can. We can put them into one of three groups. And this is what the wattle experts sort of do, and you can see this in books as well. You can just dump them into one of three groups, and every time you see one of these Australian wattles, you can think about which group it belongs to. So we have three groups. It doesn't really matter which one you put with which. There's two phylloidal groups and there's one bipinnate group. So group 1, the species will produce juvenile compound leaves, as they all do, and then they produce adult phyllodes. And the flowers are arranged in globular heads. And the heads are produced either solitarily or in larger raceme or panicle-like groups, generally out of the leaf axils. They can be terminal as well, but a lot of the time they're coming out of the leaf axils. That's probably an example of what it means to be sort of a terminal inflorescence sticking right out there. So globular heads solitary, globular heads produced in larger racemose groups. Globular heads on this one, I think, are sort of in groups, but they're short and sort of stuck closely to the stem. They might be being produced individually, actually, if we look closer. But they're globular heads and phyllodes. That's the main point there. Acacia pycnantha, that's our floral emblem. That's in group 1. It's got the phyllodes and it's got the flowers in well and truly in globular heads. And in this case, they're arranged in these larger sprays. Acacia pycnantha is one of these ones that can have up to 80 flowers, I think, in the globe. It can have 80, possibly 100 flowers. Probably makes them large and big and bright. And that's what we like our, floral emblem for. Just that beautiful globular arrangements, very showy, very distinctive, very Australian. That's group 1. Group 2, they got the phyllodes, but they're producing spikes. So phyllodes, and they produce spikes. Simple as that. That's our group 2 wattles. And don't forget those ovoid ones as well. And then group 3, they never produce phyllodes. They retain the bipinnate foliage. And this is just something you might not have known. Every bipinnate species produces globular heads. They never produce spikes. And not only do they produce globular heads, but they produce globular heads in racemose or panicle-like groups. They don't seem to produce them solitary like that prickly phylloidal Acacia licifolia did. They produce globular heads in panicle-like groups. That's what all the bipinnate ones do. They never produce spikes, and I've just had the odd person tell me they never realised that they're always globular. So that's the third group. Always retaining the juvenile bipinnate foliage, globular heads produced in larger panicle-like groups. So that's the 3 wattle groups, and I always run with it. Group 3, Acacia decurrens here. You can see the nice globular heads. They're in these racemose sprays. Really beautiful wattles. And then they produce a pod. They go on to produce a bean pod. Doesn't matter what group they're in. Remember, all Fabaceae species are producing a variation on this. So this is a bean pod. The seeds are in there in a transverse orientation to the pod. They're always laid across. And in this case, it's got a waxy hue on it, but they don't all have to have that. This is a nice genuine pod, you know, 2 centimetres wide, probably 5 centimetres long or thereabouts. Just look at the variation. You can have pods in the wattles from 1 to 20 centimetres up to 2 centimetres wide, as narrow as, you know, 3 mils across. And they're produced very quickly after flowering. They're produced very quickly. Flowering might last for about a month, maybe 3 weeks. And then the pods are produced about a month or 2 after flowering. If you want to collect them, want to collect the seed, you got to be quick. You got to get out there and you got to get them. If you wait 2 to 3 months after flowering, you're going to probably find the pods all over the ground and it's done. They're all finished. So they do business very quickly. Just some examples. That's buxifolia, nice bean pods. Maybe they're not orientated transverse in this particular case. Maybe they're arranged to be in line with the pod. That's Acacia linifolia. And on this particular herbarium specimen, and a lot of wattles do this, you can see the pods have coiled up. Now that's not just because they're dry. They can do this on the tree. They can do this on the plant. So they get nice and coiled. And a lot of wattles will do this as well. So I've got some photos of this from a tree I met. You can see the pods on the tree coiled up. It can be a solid identification feature, or it can help enormously in identification sometimes. And don't forget, it'll ripen quickly. It'll split down both sides so the seeds get released. There's a hell of a lot of coiling going on in this particular plant here. So that's just some features about the pods. Then we look at the seeds. Often they're brown to black and shiny a lot of the time. And they've got a feature here which goes for a lot of peas, or pretty much most peas. Fabaceae seeds, or legume seeds, they've got this attachment, and you can call it an aril or an olasum. They've got this attachment, which is a oil body, or a body of fats and oils, and the ants really go for this stuff. So the ants will get hold of the seeds. They'll chomp through this fat oil body. Sometimes they'll take the seed into their nest so they can chomp through it. And they tend to throw the rest of the seed aside. And what they do by doing that is put the seed in a really nice environment where it can germinate after a fire, or just germinate readily anyway. And the ants will move the seeds around, put them in a good spot, disperse them, and the seeds will germinate. The seed doesn't really mind if that fat body gets distributed. It's an attractant for ants to move the seeds around. So if you look at a lot of Fabaceae species, you can look at a ton of Fabaceae species, you'll see this on there, this olasum or this aril. The seeds are only a few mil long most of the time, and the seed are normally attached to the inside of the pod by a funicle. It's a thread or a stalk of tissue. They're really thread-like, and they attach the seed to the pod body. So just a feature if you look inside the pods. I don't tend to do that a lot, but if you get them early enough and break them open, you can see that funicle in there. So they've got really funky seeds, the wattles. Don't forget, if you want to germinate these and create some plants, you got to put them through a bit of a process. You got to put them through a heat treating process to mimic a fire. So what people do is they'll get hold of these seeds, they'll put the seeds in a bowl and they'll pour boiling hot water on top of them. From the kettle works well, or even under a hot tap if you can get the water hot enough. You put these seeds in a bowl and a bit of hot water, and you'll get a much better germination rate. It sort of mimics a fire, and it triggers the seed into germinating. Just some general stuff to finish off, because I've gone for an hour and I've got to try and knock this over. Wattles respond very well after fire. Normally you get mass seedling events. And it seems to me that most species seem to regenerate from seed. and you don't get too many species going in for the suckering or the reshooting of stems. You do get it. You do get some wattles that do it, but there's a lot of wattles, if you know they've got a genuine trunk to them, and you sort of cut through that trunk, like you might with a eucalypt, maybe to prune it or something. You don't get a lot of suckering and you don't get a lot of reshooting with these wattles. And to me, that sort of makes sense, because if you're living fast and dying young, you might have sort of, you might be sort of geared to just producing a lot of seed and then giving up the ghost and sort of dying. You're not putting a lot of effort into, you know, organs or buds on the side of the stems that will regenerate or reshoot, especially after fire, like a lot of those Myrtaceae and Proteaceae species do. I've definitely have seen some wattles that can sucker, they can reshoot, and they can do that after bushfire. But in the majority of cases, if you get a fire, the wattle will die and then it'll just put on a mass seedling germination. That's what it does with the next generation. So just bear that in mind. They're not reshooting or suckering a lot of the time. They'll just put on thousands of seedlings after a fire. We can have a lot of trouble in some cases discerning the natural geographic ranges of a lot of wattles, especially in some bushlands where we think we might have some non-local native species. It can be hard to define. You can have wattles in your patch of bushlands like Baileana and Floribunda and Fimbriata, and a lot of the time they're naturalising and they're not really meant to be there. Like when you get Acacia Fimbriata on an upper sandstone ridge in Sydney, they're sort of naturalising from cultivation nearby. So it can be a bit hard these days to talk about their natural geographic range. It seems to me that we've built highways and country roads and freeways, and we've made those road embankments, and it seems to me the wattles have just gone thank you and just gone bang, and they've just gone all along the road verge spreading seed. If you drive along some country roads or drive a road like the Hume Highway, you can really see wattles doing their thing. You can see how many you can identify as you're driving past. They just spread along those road verges, move into other areas, possibly move into adjoining intact bushlands. And it's sometimes hard to say now, this is a definite geographic range of this particular wattle just because it's naturalising everywhere, and they can become weedy. If you're doing something like a vegetation management plan and you've got to determine a species list, maybe for a revegetation area or a revegetated creek, it can be hard to determine which wattles sort of belong there. Like, are you going to recommend Acacia Fimbriata or Floribunda or ones like that? It just can get very difficult. So I did say some have become weedy. Acacia saligna from Western Australia and New South Wales, Acacia longifolia from New South Wales in Western Australia, Acacia Baileana, which is moving about all over the places from cultivation. It can just be difficult to determine which ones are local. So it's just a note there. You don't get that problem anywhere near as much in eucalypts. It's a much harder in wattles, I think. Just note the many anthropogenic uses, and they are becoming sort of more and more indigenous. They were used for pharmacy, weapons and other items. I think they were used in making boomerangs and things like that. Fish poisons, some wattles are poisonous. The seeds can be used as a food, used in the making of damper. Modern day, they're really good, some species, for making furniture, musical instruments. I'm thinking of Acacia melanoxylon and the black wattle. It's a real woodworker's favourite. We've also got a gum sauce, which has a lot of industrial applications in food, pharmacy, sort of product making. There's gum arabica, which comes from some wattles, and it's a real useful resource in industrial uses. The seed, in modern times, we're also using the seed to make damper and adding it to cakes and all that sort of thing. Just note they're very popular too in horticulture, and they're really relied on in revegetation, especially in degraded landscapes. If you can get some wattles growing and they're fixing the nitrogen, people will say they're improving the soil. They're adding nitrogen to the soil, they're rehabilitating the landscape. All that stuff comes in with wattles, especially when you got, 1,000 species. Research continues on pharmaceutical uses. I've seen things like antidepressants, possibly treating dementia, antioxidant capabilities, and psychedelic capabilities as well. I've seen all that in there online. So I think I've gotten to the end. Just note this diagram that you can find on the Atlas of Living Australia. If you just Google something like wattle phylogeny CSIRO, it'll take you to this page. And it's just a recent sort of part cladistic diagram of the wattles, where each one sits in relation to each other. They're not all shown on here, but you've got representatives of the clades being shown on here. I just zoomed in just to show that it looks like the bipinnate species are all forming one clade. You don't have bipinnate species coming out on separate clades. So it looks like the bipinnate wattles we see today in Australia have sort of had one evolutionary sort of event. They comprise a monophyletic group. Maybe Spectabilis is their sort of ancestor, but all the bipinnates sit happily in this group over here, and all the other ones are phylodial species. So just trying to link all those sort of ideas together on classification. I guess the bipinnates have evolved from a common ancestor in the last maybe interglacial period or something like that, or in a period of wetter and cooler conditions. And the rest are phylodial. So it's a nice diagram. You can scan over it on the Atlas of Living Australia, go up and down and scan over it. Okay, I'm pretty sure I'm at the end. So thanks, folks. I hope you find it useful. If you've got any comments, put them down there and I'll try and answer them for you. Or if you've got something to tell me that you think I should have put in, happy to hear that as well. Thank you.